1 minute, guys. Net students, will somebody please post in the group, in the chat box, those who are unable to hear, please increase your volume or rejoin. Will you please post someone like we did in the other session? All right. All done. Okay. Okay. So guys, let me just speak for a few minutes first. This course on criticism and theory, I planned because there are some students who are already studying at TES, like Karnataka Assistant Professor Exam people, HSA people, and then the HSST Kerala, HSST students, aspirants who have just joined. For all these people, criticism and theory is a requirement. Then there are also NTA NET students. Even though NTA NET course will have criticism and theory at the end, I thought if we begin with criticism and theory along with the others, then you will get a perspective. When we are studying literature, this perspective will help you. And HSA, Karnataka people, HSST people, etc., will get a very good background, some additional information apart from what they have already been studying in the course or what they will study in the course. So this is an extra session for all these students. Now, there are people in this group who are not attending any of these courses. There are people who are just attending this criticism and theory course. The material that I will be sharing with you is the basic material for our upcoming Encyclopedia of Criticism and Theory. Encyclopedia of Criticism and Theory. I don't know if I'll be able to bring it out very soon, but we are working on it. And this material that I'm giving you will be added to, enriched, refurbished, more. And we will have an encyclopedia soon, probably, if God helps us. There are some books like M.A.R. Habib, Nagarajan, B. Prasad, and Raman Selvan, etc., that are very important primary materials that not only primary, they are very advanced also, that are important for criticism and theory. In exams, they often ask from these books. So I am following these books, not in that much detail, but the essential parts of these books I am covering in this course. Especially for the Karnataka Assistant Professor people, their syllabus is like everything in criticism. The whole area is prescribed for them, not any particular author or work. So the maximum you get to know points, the better it is. So from that approach, I have covered it. Listen, some of you are beginners. Some of you may not have studied MA completely. You are doing your MA only, or probably BA also. There are some BA students also here. Some of you may have finished your MA, but may not have understood criticism and theory that much. Please understand that I am teaching from the basics. I'm trying to explain everything. But if anything is not clear, don't panic. In net course, especially, we will again have all this. When you have doubts, please note them down and ask me. I will explain separately as audio. I will send in all the groups. So if you have any doubts as we are moving on, don't panic. Just understand that it is okay. This is like a feast. So much is there. It doesn't mean each and everything you have to eat. Whatever you want, you eat. Keep the rest for later. That approach you can have if you are a beginner. Okay. This is a Zoom session live. This link will not work later, as you might know. I am live in YouTube, as you know. I have already posted the link. At the end of the course, I will again post all the YouTube links together or give you the playlist. Then you can use these links forever. Or all your life, you can watch again and again for revision if necessary. Okay. The PDF for this session will be given to you in your group. So those are the basic things. I already suggested, written by me. Okay, I will share with you in your group criticism and theory books also. There are criticism and theory books in Bodhi. If you are able to, I am telling you, the cheapest for you is to buy the entire book of set of 44 books. If you buy individually, it will come to a lot of money. If you can spare, it is only like 10,600. It is only, I'm saying, because actually it costs 18,000. And there are 44 books, like it's like a whole library. I don't think there is any book that is unnecessary there. All these will help you in different ways. So the best idea, if you have the money and you want to spend it, is to buy the entire set, because it is economical for you. Otherwise, postage and everything additionally will come for every book, and for each book, individual price is also higher. I'm just telling you right now, there is the discount. Today, we have criticism introduction. And I have added many new slides. People from previous batches, people from Unacademy, etc., may not have got all these slides that I have today, because in every class when I teach, I add something more. I teach more. Okay. So if it seems a little heavy for you, that doesn't matter. It will help you in the rest of your career. So relax and enjoy. I'm sharing the screen with you. Literary criticism and introduction. What is literary criticism? That is what everybody will start talking about. I will upload everything. Okay. I will, after the class in the group, I will give you literary criticism and introduction. What is literary criticism is what every one of us will first and foremost think and start to talk about. Please don't draw on the screen. No problem. I will just disable it. One minute. No problem. I know you did it accidentally. When your hand touches the screen, it happens. No problem. Meenakshi, do you want to say something? Are you raising your hand to speak? Meenakshi? You can unmute yourself if you need to speak. No. Okay, I'm muting you and moving on. What is literary criticism? That is what all of us will start with. A critic is the ideal reader who subjects the text to close scrutiny. A critic is a reader, but an ideal reader who is reading the text very carefully, looking at all the aspects of the text. Cecil Day Lewis said in The Poetic Image, I am quoting like this not because I read Cecil Day Lewis, but because I read these important books like M.A.R. Habib. They have talked about it. All the live classes can be watched in YouTube using the link I give you. Not in my channel, but with the link that I give you. Okay, so I am quoting from M.A.R. Habib, etc. A critic is the ideal reader who subjects the text to close scrutiny. Cecil Day Lewis wrote a very famous essay, The Poetic Image. Cecil Day Lewis said, the critic has one preeminent task. The critic has one important task, one thing that he does, the task of easing or widening or deepening our response to poetry. We have, as a reader, suppose this is a book of poetry. As a reader, I have a response to poetry. Are you able to follow? As a reader, I have a response to poetry. that response becomes easy. Easing means it becomes easy. It becomes wide. It becomes deep because of criticism. That means criticism helps us to read better. Criticism helps us to have a better response to poetry. Did you understand? That is what Cecil Day Lewis said in The Poetic Image. The word critic derived from the Greek word kritos. In Greek, there is the word kritos. Ancient Greece, in the time of Plato, Aristotle, at that time, there was the word kritos, which means to judge. To judge. Don't criticize me, you will say. You know, when your husband talks about, why are you wearing this saree? It doesn't suit you. Don't criticize me. I will wear what I want. Like that you say, na? That means what? Criticism means judging. Okay. Originally, it has a negative meaning, but it need not be negative. The critic as judge, that is one role of the critic. The critic as interpreter, another role of the critic. The critic as generalizer, another role. The critic as scholar, yet another role. What are they? The critic as judge means the capacity of the critic to recognize the good. I am reading book of poetry. Remember, I am reading good book of poetry. This is lyrical ballads I am reading. What is this? Is it a good book? I am recognizing good elements in this book. It has simple language, conversational language. Very good, very good. Oh, it talks about simple life. Very good. Oh, it includes imagination. Very good. That also I understood. That means as a critic, I am reading. I am understanding the good in this book. What is good in this book? And I am rejecting what is worthless. This is not a good book. I don't want to read this because it has many bad elements. So I don't like it. Like that, if you read, then you are critic as judge. Understanding the good elements and bad elements. Clear? What do you mean by critic as interpreter? Critic as interpreter means the critical appraisal and elucidation of works. What do you mean by that? Appraisal of works. That means what are the features of this work? What are the themes of this work? What are the different genres? What are the uses of this genre? Genre means kind of literature. So if you read like that, then you are interpreting the book. You are doing a critical appraisal or understanding or interpretation of the book. You are elucidating the book. Remember, guys, many of you continuously talk to me in Hindi. You have also told me that sometimes you don't understand what is being taught in classes in English. In English, you have to study because in the exam, they are asking many difficult words. Only if you know English language will you be able to pass NET. So from now on, don't study English literature in Hindi or any other language because it will affect your NET. If you study in Hindi, many things that they are asking in the exam, the question itself, you won't understand. So in any exam, you need to study English only, in English only. So do that, okay? If any word is difficult, look it up. Slowly, you will improve. If you find it difficult now, don't worry, it will improve. So critic as interpreter means a critic is interpreting the work. What are the features? What is this genre? What are the themes? Like that, if you think, then you are critic as interpreter. Many books are there like that. Apology for Poetry by Philip Sidney. Philip Sidney's Apology for Poetry. It is also called Defense of Poesy. That is criticism as interpretation. Then Of Dramatic Poesy by Dryden. Preface to the Fables by Dryden. Preface to the Fables is also called On Translating the Poets. Okay, On Translating the Poets, another word for Preface to the Fables. Again, those who are beginners, we will deal with all this in the coming classes. So wait, don't worry. I just want you to hear all this now. Apology for Poetry by Sidney, Of Dramatic Poesy by Dryden, Preface to the Fables or On Translating the Poets by Dryden, Preface to Shakespeare by Johnson, Dr. Johnson, Coleridge's Lectures on Shakespeare, Study of Poetry by Arnold, All this is criticism as interpretation. Then there is criticism as generalization. You are reading literary works. I am reading one literary work. I am reading another literary work. I am reading yet another literary work. From all this, you are reaching some generalizations. You are developing a theory out of it. You are developing some common principles of writing out of it. I am reading Lycidas. It is a pastoral elegy, I understand. Then I am reading Adonai. It is also a pastoral elegy. Then I am reading In Memoriam. It is also a pastoral elegy. And then I develop a theory of pastoral elegy. What is pastoral elegy? New theory I write. I create. Sometimes people, new theory of tragedy. Somebody already wrote about tragedy. Aristotle wrote. Then other people are saying other things about tragedy. More critics are saying more things about tragedy. How? Because they are critics as generalizers. They are developing theory. Aristotle's Poetics is like that. Wordsworth's Preface to Lyrical Ballads is like that. Hazlitt's Of Poetry in General is like that. T.S. Eliot's Tradition and the Individual Talent is like that. The use of poetry and the use of criticism, that is also by T.S. Eliot. What is a classic? That is also by T.S. Eliot. So beginners understand all these things are there. These books we will talk about later. Advanced students and some teachers also might be attending this course. Understand some of these we did not know. Hazlitt's Of Poetry in General we never heard, or we didn't know probably. So remember, these are also important. Critic as generalizer. Then critic as scholar means what? Consolidating historical knowledge. That critic is not developing anything. He is reading books, studying history, developing a tradition. He is creating historical knowledge by consolidating information. That is critic as scholar. Will you remember? Helen Gardiner, have you heard? I also didn't hear. Because I read M.A.R. Habib, I understood. Helen Gardiner wrote Profession of a Critic. Helen Gardiner, very important book. E.M.W. Tilliard wrote The Elizabethan World Picture. That is another important book. J.L. Lewis wrote The Road to Xanadu. That is another important book. These are all important books where historical knowledge of literature is given. That is historical knowledge or criticism as scholarship. Will you remember? If you are advanced people who already know criticism pretty good, pretty well, today itself, just Google search all these writers, okay? I am not a know-all. I am not a person who knows each and everything in the world. I am just like encyclopedia. No, 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 no. I am a student. I am like you. I am learning with you. So more than what I know, you should know. Only then you will pass exams now. So what I am giving you is the step. You stand on it and then build your castle. This is the foundation. From here, you should read more. Those of you who are advanced learners, those of you who are beginners, don't worry, just wait. So you understood, na? Critic as judge, critic as interpreter, critic as generalizer, critic as scholar. Now, what is criticism and theory? Two terms are there, hai na? Criticism and theory. Criticism is about the text. Theory is about things or ideas or concepts that are important even before the text is written. In criticism, you always take a text and read it. Oh, this text has this theme. This text has this style. This text is belonging to this genre. Like that it is criticism. Theory is talk about language, talk about subjectivity, talk about ideology. From all these things, later this text came into being. Large ideas are there in theory. But criticism is always... So first there is theory. Then there is text. Then there is criticism. Criticism is about the text, but theory comes before the text. Here theory, here criticism. Did you understand? Theory comes before the text, criticism comes after the text. Ijaz Ahmad has written in theory, classes, nations, literatures in 1992, where he has discussed criticism and theory. He has discussed the distinction between criticism and theory. He said criticism studies criticism means studies concerned with defining, classifying. He didn't say that, M.H. Abraham said that. Classifying, analyzing, interpreting, evaluating works of literature. What does criticism do? It defines literature, classifies literature, analyzes literature, interprets, evaluates. Clear? These are all the various things that criticism does. First, literature should be there. Then only criticism can do all these things. Criticism belongs to liberal humanist tradition, which itself is an antonym to theory. Antonym means opposite. Criticism takes literature, first defines it. Okay, pastoral elegy is poetry written by shepherds in the voice of shepherds about death, etc. So defining literature, classifying literature. Okay, these are pastoral elegies. These are other kinds of elegies. These are Juvenalian. These are Horatian. Like that, classification. Then analyzing. It means talking about interpreting and analyzing, talk about the features of these works. Evaluating means, is it good or bad? Some books are classics. Some books are not so great. You should study the classics. Classics become touchstone. When you say things like that, then that is criticism. Criticism belongs to liberal humanist tradition. Liberal humanism means there is an author, the belief that there is an author, the author has ideas, emotions, the author's ideas, emotions, etc. should be put into literary work. This is a book I wrote, okay? This is my book. I wrote this poetry book. I put my emotions into the book. I put my ideas into the book. Think of Sylvia Plath. How Sylvia Plath put her ideas, emotions, experiences into her poetry. Understanding literature as a book written by an author that includes ideas of the author, emotions of the author, etc. That is called liberal humanism. That means human being is central. Human being has a role. Did you understand? Liberal humanism means human being plays a crucial role. The author plays a role. The character plays a role. This is Hamlet. This is the book Hamlet. Hamlet plays a major role in this book. The character of Hamlet is very important. In liberal humanism, we talk about the character of Hamlet, the character of Julius Caesar, the character of Prospero. Whereas when you study Wasteland, which is anti-humanist, you don't talk about what is the character of Tiresias. You don't talk about, because that human being is not what is central in the text. That human being, Tiresias, is not the central figure in the text. There are other things in the text that are important. Did you understand, everybody? So liberal humanism gives importance to human being, human emotion, human values, human experience. And that is opposite to theory. Theory says no human being. Human being is a construct. Theory says there is no human being like that sitting there. Human being is a construct. Human being is made from the situations, the circumstances. Human being is not permanently there, always thinking the same thoughts, always writing the same things, not like that. Human being is a construct. Human being is the result of the circumstances. Human being is the result of power. Human being is the result of ideology. Like that, human being is deconstructed in theory. Theory, literary theory, does not believe in the greatness of the human being. Literary theory does not believe in the permanence of the human being. You are able to understand? Literary theory is against criticism in that sense. Literary theory uses different frameworks to evaluate and interpret a particular work. In literary theory, there are different frameworks. Let us take The Tempest. This is the book Tempest, okay? Let us take The Tempest. The Tempest can be read from a feminist perspective. I'm going to read this from a feminist perspective. This is what you do when you do research. Many of you are doing research. Many of you will ask me, ma'am, how will I read this book? What theory should I apply? How will I explain? How will I argue? When you ask such questions, what are you doing? You are actually applying different frameworks to evaluate a work. One of you will do research on this book using feminist theory. The same book another person will read using post-colonial theory. The same book another person will read using Marxist theory. The same book another person will read using cultural studies perspective. So literary theory uses different frameworks for reading, evaluating, interpreting particular works. Did you understand? There in literary theory, framework is important. In literary criticism, no framework. Literary criticism plunges into the text. The literary critic is inside the text and reading what is inside the text. The literary critic is reading like this only. He is reading only the text. He doesn't have any other framework or anything. But the literary theorist has a framework. He is reading the text from this framework. One theorist is reading the text from this framework. Another theorist is reading the text from this framework. Do you understand? Do you understand what I'm saying? One critic is reading like this, looking through this. Another critic is looking like this, looking through this. You are able to understand? This framework is not there in criticism. Theory uses different frameworks to evaluate and interpret a particular work. And theory guides those who criticize literary works. Remember, this is literature. This is literature. First theory came, then criticism came. Criticism nowadays looks at theory to learn how to read, because theory has some frameworks. Theorist is keeping some frameworks. Critic did not have anything like that. The critic these days is looking at the theorist and copying these frameworks here also. Did you understand? Literary criticism from the Marxist perspective is there. Literary criticism from the feminist perspective is there. So theory has guided or inspired those who criticize literary works. Clear, everybody? Okay. Let me unmute you. All your problems solved? In the beginning, many of you had doubts. Will I understand what is going to happen? Is this clear? Is this what I need? Will I pass net because of this? Do I need this for HSA? Do I need this for HSST? Oh my God, so many questions you had. I told you, please give me some time. I will solve your problems. Your problems are solved now. If there is anybody who has problems, speak now.
Good evening, ma'am. Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening. When did criticism originate is coming in the next 10 slides. Please wait. Okay, speak.
So before theory came into existence, was criticism easier to do than today? What we have with different perspectives, we have to criticize a work of art. Was criticism in earlier days? Was it easy for Aristotle or Plato or Longinus or Horace?
Now let me explain. Shall I mute you? I'll explain. Thank you for asking that question. I said, first there was only criticism. The critics were reading, then theory came. Then criticism began getting inspiration from theory. Historically, criticism came first, theory came next. But the ideas of criticism and theory always existed. When today, whatever we call subjectivity was there in some other way, in some other form. Earlier also, theory was not absent. From whatever was there, something called theory, it became reorganized as theory. That is all. In the early days, when criticism alone, the name only criticism alone was there, the elements of literary theory there existed still. Literary theories, ideas, literary theories, concerns were there in the age of criticism also. Now, at that time, criticism was joining hands with philosophy. Criticism was mostly about philosophy. And literary theory is also about philosophy. Literary theory is a new way of rearranging philosophy and looking at things. Both philosophy and theory are perspectives. New ways of looking at things, new perspectives. So if you ask me if literary criticism was easier, I will not say easier. I will not say it was any easier, because it was very deeply involved with theory, philosophy and its concerns. It is only a rearrangement and a new way of looking at things that theory brought in. And the biggest difference between criticism and theory is that criticism is humanist, theory is anti-humanist. So it was not easier. I wouldn't say. I would say it was different. Unmuting you. Anything else? Shall I continue?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Muting you. There are three broad areas in criticism that is there in our books. One is legislative criticism. Legislative criticism lays down rules for writing. How to write a book, how to write poetry. For example, Horace. Horace wrote Ars Poetica. Poetics of Aristotle. Elizabethan criticism entirely is legislative criticism, laying down rules of writing. Did you understand? Laying down rules of writing, how to write. Secondly, aesthetic criticism. Aesthetic criticism treats literature as an art, as self-expression. Aesthetic criticism is an independent, literature as an independent activity of the mind. You know, the talent of the writer, the peculiarity and uniqueness of the writer, how he is changing literature and established traditions. That kind of criticism was practiced by Sidney, Dryden. Of course, in Sidney and Dryden, legislative and aesthetic both are there. I am not saying one or the other, both are there. In Sidney, you can see elements of aesthetic criticism. Dryden, Addison, Coleridge, sorry for the spelling mistake. Cool, he's very cool. That's why I made him Coleridge. I think Coleridge is a better name than Coleridge, isn't it? Now, Sidney, Dryden, Addison, Coleridge, Walter Pater, Oscar Wilde, I.A. Richards, all these people treated literature as an independent activity of the mind. That is what is called aesthetic criticism. Did you understand? You don't have to understand that much. Once I teach all these people, you will understand more. Then you read all these PPTs from the beginning again. Okay. Then you will get more and more ideas. So aesthetic criticism, then descriptive criticism. Descriptive criticism means what? Study of individual works and writers. You are taking one book and studying it. What are the aims of this book? What are the methods of this book? What are the effects of this book? So descriptive criticism, for example, you can see in Ben Jonson's Conversations with Drummond, or Dryden's Preface to the Fables, Dr. Johnson's Preface to Shakespeare, etc. They are all descriptive criticism, where individual authors and works are described. And you want me to repeat humanist and anti-humanist? I will repeat. Is theory biased and criticism unbiased? Okay, I will explain. So that is descriptive criticism. Humanism means human being is central. Human being is taken as the authority. Human being in three ways. Human being can be author, human being can be character, human being can be reader. All these three human beings are given a lot of importance in humanistic traditions. Understanding these people as well-developed, mature human beings who write in certain ways, who read in certain ways, who experience in certain ways. Anti-humanism understands that human being is also a product. Human being is the result of power. Human being is the result of ideology. You know, you look at why Shakespeare created Prospero like this. What are the, when you do anti-humanist reading of Tempest, then you deconstruct Tempest. You look at Caliban also as powerful. You look at Satan as powerful in Paradise Lost. All that is a little anti-humanist, because little or more anti-humanist, because you are deconstructing the author's perception. The author himself is ambiguous. That is the meaning of anti-humanism. Did you understand? And many later 20th century critics and theorists are anti-humanists. Critics and theorists are all anti-humanists. Is theory biased or preconceived and criticism unbiased? No, you can't say like that. Critics and theorists both can be biased or unbiased. It is better to be unbiased. Being biased or preconceived is bad. In theory, however, the idea that subjectivity is okay. You can't be objective. You are inevitably subjective. That idea is there in theory. You can't read from a universal, homogenized, you always right perspective. There is nothing like that. There are only subjective, individual perspectives. Our Frankfurt School said that, post-structuralists said that, postmodernists said that. So post-colonial critics say that. They're all anti-humanists, and they all believe that there is no single right perspective. Every human being, based on his situations, based on his context, will read in certain ways. They are all acceptable. All subjective readings are acceptable. So biased is not the right word. Nobody should be biased. Biased is extreme prejudice. That is bad. But unavoidably, we are subjective. That theory understands. However, criticism traditionally taught that there are right ways of reading. Better, you accepted status quo is there, they believed. Mainstream ways of reading. They believed that. Yes. Now, I hope you understood legislative criticism, which lays down rules, aesthetic criticism, which accepts the creativity of the author, understands art as independent, descriptive criticism, which takes individual authors and works and describes it. These are the three broad areas. Classical and romantic are two other areas. They are not watertight compartments. Some elements of classicism are found in romanticism. Some elements of romanticism are found in classicism also. Did you understand? They are not watertight compartments. They are ideologies, or they are ways of perspectives of looking at things. They are ways in which power is organized. That is the meaning of ideology. What do you mean by classical? Everything that belonged to Greco-Roman classicism. In the past, in the BCs, there was Greek classicism. Tomorrow we will talk about it. Then came Roman classicism. They had certain values. They had certain approaches. All that is one meaning of classical. Aristotle, Plato, Longinus, Horace, etc. Second meaning, it is a term used to distinguish between Greco-Roman art and neoclassical imitations. In the 18th century, there was neoclassicism. Neoclassicism is not fully classical. When 18th century dawned, when neoclassicism came into being, then people began to say, this is neoclassical, that is classical. Greco-Roman is classical. Neoclassicism is mostly imitation of the classical. Getting me? Neoclassicism means Dryden, Pope, Johnson, etc. in England. Neoclassicism took a lot of ideas from classicism, combined it with certain other ideas, like their own English styles, etc. Dryden took classical ideas, combined it with English ideas, and made it neoclassical. Neoclassicism is not pakka, completely classicism. It is a watered down version of classicism, because they changed many ideas in neoclassicism. In classicism, they changed it when they made it neoclassicism. Are you able to understand? From the Greco-Roman period, they took ideas. There should be order, okay? There should be unity, okay? There should be consistency, okay? All these things they learned from the classical masters, the Greco-Roman masters. But when it came to neoclassicism, Dryden and Johnson changed it. Dryden said, Dryden and Johnson both said, it is okay to use tragicomedy actually. It is okay to violate the unities actually. They are changing classical ideas. In classicism, you can never change unities. You can never use tragicomedy. But Dryden and Johnson are changing it, because in England, people like Shakespeare were writing violation of unities. They were doing anti-classical things at that time. So in order to show that we English are also good, great people, otherwise those French people will dominate over us. You understand? Dryden and Johnson are avoiding the French domination and saying, we English are also good. Our Shakespeare is also good. Actually, it is okay to violate some of the unities. Actually, it is okay to write tragicomedy. You can't say classical rules are completely necessary. Sometimes we have other rules also. This is neoclassicism. Neoclassicism is classicism plus some changes, some water. Did you understand? Third meaning of classical means what? To describe works that embody the Greek spirit. You know, Greek values are there in Ode on a Grecian Urn. One of the classical odes of John Keats. You will think, what does it mean? John Keats is romantic. Why in this book, why are they saying classical odes of John Keats? Maybe because of this meaning. John Keats is romantic, but in John Keats, there are some classical elements also. I told you they are not watertight compartments. John Keats wrote Ode on a Grecian Urn and such works embodying the Hellenistic spirit or Greek spirit. That means self-contained unity, perfect proportion of parts, some ideas of Greek culture. When these are there, you can call them classical, even though they are not Greco-Roman. They may not be Greco-Roman, they may not be neoclassical, but still they can be called classical. Today, in the 21st century also, you can write a classical poem if you want, embodying Greek values. Did you understand? Watertight compartment means they are the element of one is not there in the other. You take a box, you make two watertight compartments. Watertight means this element will be completely absent here. Classicism and Romanticism are not watertight compartments, means Classicism and Romanticism are not completely separate. Some elements of Classicism are found in Romanticism. Some elements of Romanticism may be found in Classicism. Got it? Now, what is Romanticism? Romanticism means rejection of rules. Changing established traditions comes under which type of criticism? Iconoclastic criticism, probably. Did I say anything about it? Changing established traditions means giving birth to a new tradition. That you can say iconoclastic criticism. There is no particular word for it. New tradition. Okay. What is Romanticism? While Classicism believed in following rules. Classicism is about following rules. Romanticism rejects rules. Romanticism is about individualism and subjectivity. Human being is important. Human being is unique. In Classicism also, human being is important. Listen, everybody, both these are humanists. Both these are humanists. I will add that here. Are both humanistic ideologies. Classicism and Romanticism are both humanistic ideologies. Both these are humanism. In Classicism, human being is important, but not the individual. The community is important. The tradition is important in Classicism. Whereas in Romanticism, the individual is important. Romanticism is about individualism and subjectivity. Romanticism gives importance to individualism and subjectivity. Human being is unique. The human being's experience, the human being's emotion, the human being's values are all expressed in Romantic literature. Romanticism gives importance to the particular, not the general. Romanticism is about the individual, the particular, not the general, not the universal, not the communal, not the historical. Every individual can be unique in Romanticism. Romanticism was, like you said, Devi, Romanticism was a completely new tradition, overturning earlier traditions. The particular, not the general. Yo, did you know? William Blake said, he who generalizes is an idiot. Kya hai William Blake? William Blake is so cut and dry. He says, he who generalizes is an idiot, because in Romanticism, generalization is not accepted. Critic as, what did we say earlier? We said critic as generalizer. This is not romantic. This is not romantic, okay? But in preface to lyrical ballads, there is a theory of romanticism emerging. Generally, this is not particularly romantic. This is more classical than romantic. Now, romanticism gives importance to passionate feeling and sensibility. Feeling for other people, feeling for nature, passionate feeling and sensibility is important in romanticism. And idealization of medievalism. In romanticism, there is also the element of the medieval. Medieval means Middle Ages. The Middle Ages and their culture becomes important in romanticism. Coleridge, for example, employed medievalism. Gothic romance employed medievalism, isn't it? Medievalism is a very, Keats employed medievalism. Medievalism is a very important element of romanticism. So much you understood, everybody? Right. Now, I'm going to tell you a history of criticism now. Ready for that? I'm going to tell you a history of criticism. It is almost 1 hour. Will you give me a 1 minute break? I will just come. You also refresh yourselves. Don't worry about me. Teaching 2 hours or 4 hours is nothing with God's grace. God has been helping me. Amen. God has helped me to teach for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours at a stretch also. I have taught 10 hours at a stretch one day. Not one day, many days. So in unacademy times, it has happened. 8 hours, 10 hours, normally I was teaching. They're saying it is a God's grace. It is something that God is helping me with. I hope He helps me further. Anyway, as long as possible, I will be able to teach. You don't worry, okay? I will come in 1 or 2 minutes. Ta-da-dang! Welcome back. I'm ready. So, I'm going to tell you a history of criticism. The earliest critics were poets only. I told you first poetry was there, then criticism. The earliest critics were poets only. Their work was intuitive and unsystematic because they were speaking from their intuition, from their mind. There was no framework. This framework was not there. Their work was intuitive and unsystematic. That means whatever they wanted, they said. Which question, Anu, you are asking? I didn't see your question. Medievalism is not clear to me. Medievalism means following the stories of Middle Ages. In Coleridge's Kubla Khan, for example, or Christabel, or John Keats's Lamia, La Belle Dame Sans Mercy. All these are medieval stories. Medieval stories means a little darkness. Dark means negativity, fear, magic, supernaturalism, passion, evil, or some such passion. These elements will be there. In Coleridge's Christabel, evil is there. In La Belle Dame Sans Mercy, some fairy is, seducing a knight. These kind of magical, fantastic, supernatural elements are not there in the later modern period. Earlier medieval element, this is. A lot of medieval elements are found in Romanticism. That is the meaning. Now, let me talk about criticism from the beginning. The earliest critics were poets. They just spoke whatever they wanted. Their work was intuitive, unsystematic, moralistic, and formalistic. Intuitive means just based on intuition, not based on any rules or anything. Unsystematic, not organized. Moralistic, always focusing on morality, morals. What is important is moral. Literature should teach us morals. It should teach us to be better people. Literature should teach us values. That is the meaning of moralistic. Then formalistic means focusing too much on the form of literature, focusing too much on the structure, the devices, the metaphor, the language and diction, not the content. Content and form are two parts of literature. Focusing too much on form, it was in those days, at the beginning. They analyzed society and art at the same time. Art was not analyzed independently. Through that, they talked about society also. Did you understand? The earliest critics did not look at art independently. We have not only a Western tradition, we have other traditions also. Sanskrit literary tradition is there that began with Rig Veda. After that, we have Sanskrit aesthetics. Rasa, Dhvani, Alankara, and such schools of Sanskrit aesthetics emerged. Then the Dravidian critical tradition began even before that. Sorry, after that, in 5th century BC with Tolkappiyam, where nature, literary work, emotions of the author or character were all understood in a connected manner. Tolkappiyam has a very unique way of understanding nature and art and the human being in a very connected manner. Then the Western literary tradition, critical tradition that began with Homer. As you know, Homer is a poet. Homer is a poet, but through poetry, he did criticism. Western tradition began with Homer. Then came Pindar. Pindar is a poet, but through poetry, there was a criticism of traditions of society that happened. Aristophanes, whose play Frogs is a very important example of criticism. In Aristophanes' play Frogs, we see Dionysius himself going to Hades or hell because there are no good poets in the world anymore. Good poets have all died. There is no good poetry. And Dionysius is going with his slave to Hades. On the way, he is meeting Heracles or Hercules. And Dionysius is reaching Hades, and he meets there Aeschylus and Euripides. Both of them start debating over who is the better poet. Aeschylus and Euripides debate over who is the better poet. Finally, Aeschylus is chosen by Dionysius, even though both were like equally good. Dionysius himself is confused, but at the end, because of the practical solutions that Aeschylus gives, Dionysius chooses Aeschylus. So what is this play about? This play is about what is good poetry. How does poetry connect with life and society? That is the meaning of, Aristophanes' play Frogs, which is the basic principle of criticism. Did you understand? And then the earliest poets were not organized people. They are the people in the BCs, even before the classical period. The people in Greece who were analyzing poetry because they were watching poetry and drama being performed as part of the festival of Dionysius. Dionysius was the god of wine, music, merriment in ancient Greece. He had a festival called City Dionysia. There, tragedy, comedy, poetry, etc. were performed. People were there watching all these performances. Some of the rich and aristocratic people commented on the action. And they came to be called Kritei or Kritas. Kritas is singular, Kritei is plural. That is how criticism emerged. And criticism finally became structured, organized in the classical period. Classical period is in the 4th century BC. Classical period means 4th century BC. Literary critical discussions in the classical period occurred in plays, like I told you, in Aristophanes' Frogs. That was one method of criticism. In classical Greece, there was Plato's indictment of poetry. That is how the discussion on poetry began. Plato's indictment of poetry. Indictment means what? Attack on poetry. Plato was skeptical of poetry. Even though poetry is great, Plato knew that it can be misused. Poetry can be misused. So Plato attacked poetry. Aristotle defended poetry because Plato was talking about poetry as it was used in his time. Plato was talking about poetry as it was used in his time. Aristotle was talking about poetry that is great. While Aristotle talked about great poetry, Plato talked about poetry as it was used. Both of them are actually saying the same thing, but they said two different things. Plato looked at the negative side of poetry. Aristotle looked at the positive side, advantages of poetry. That happened in classical Greece. Then at this time in Rome, slowly classicism emerged. After the classical period in Greece, classicism emerged in Rome. The Romans completely followed the Greeks. And they followed the Greek values, the Greek schools of philosophy, the Greek ways of writing. The important Romans of this time were Cicero, Horace, Quintilian. Cicero was a rhetorician. Horace wrote Ars Poetica. Quintilian also talked about how an orator should write. Institutio Oratorio. So these people wrote criticism. These people wrote about how writing should be done, how poetry should be written. This is what Cicero, Horace, Quintilian, etc. wrote. Some of them I will teach you tomorrow, because in exams these days, they are very important. And in Rome at this time, they focused on technical aspects. In classical Greece, they were talking more about morality, ethics. The immorality of poetry Plato talked about. Aristotle talked about the morality of poetry. Did you understand? They focused on the use of poetry. That means the social application of poetry. Use of poetry in society, morality of poetry, etc. They talked about, while in Rome, they talked about technical aspects also. How to write poetry, what is the form of poetry more, even though Aristotle also talked about it. They developed it more and they advised rhetoricians. Horace was a rhetorician. Horace gave a rhetorical interpretation of Aristotle. Rhetoric means the art of speaking, the art of persuasion. Did you understand? And rhetorician means the one who is an orator, one who uses language to persuade. Horace gave a rhetorical interpretation of Aristotle. Aristotle was the basis. Everybody knew only Aristotle. And Horace gave such an interpretation of Aristotle. Then after the classical period, there was Longinus. I put Longinus in quotation marks because we don't really know who is Longinus. There is no evidence of a man called Longinus. We only know there is a book called Perihampsus or On the Sublime. We only know there is a book called Perihampsus or On the Sublime. And it was written by one Longinus. That man, whoever it was, subverted the classical principle of restraining the passions. In Plato's time and even Aristotle's time, passions are not great things. Plato said poetry is bad because poetry lets loose passions. Aristotle said, yeah, passions are bad, but When you read poetry, you are actually letting go of passions. Passions are going out from you, so it is good. For both of them, passions are bad. You have to control your passion. You have to use reason. And Longinus, in his theory of sublimity, is talking about the greatness of emotion. Emotion can transport you to a level beyond understanding. Your understanding stops. When you get sublimity, you can't remember anything. You don't know who you are, where you are. Oh my God, you're in a trance. Your understanding stops. That is the level of sublimity. Emotions are so great that it can take you to a level beyond understanding. Wow. Longinus gave a lot of importance to passions. That is why Longinus is considered a classical critic as well as a romantic critic. He has contributed to both classicism and romanticism. Did you understand? I will teach you all that tomorrow. Now, Neoplatonism was there. Based on Plato, the writer Plotinus developed Neoplatonism. I'm not going into all these things. Some of these are a little unnecessary. I mean, you can't suddenly learn all these things. I'm not going into all these things. If you really, I want you to read on your own. If you really want to know more about Neoplatonism, ask me in the group. I will put an audio there. Okay, I have to take a medium path because there are beginners here, there are advanced level people here. I want to set the foundations right. So every single thing I can't explain, either because I don't know or because I think it is unnecessary right now. But if anybody wants to know more, I'm ready to put an audio. Okay, so Neoplatonism is based on Plato. I'm not going into it. Plotinus, Macrobius, Boethius are all associated with Neoplatonism. I am saying these names not because I found anything in the internet, but because of the books that I am summarizing here. Okay, books from where they will ask questions. Now, Neoplatonism came at the end of the classical period. It had a very major influence on the medieval period. Remember, first there is classical period, then medieval period, then modern period. At the beginning of modern period, we have Renaissance or early modern period. First ancient period, that is classical. Then Middle Ages or medieval period. At this time, church is very dominant. Church. And then we have modern period. At the beginning of modern period, there is Renaissance. Renaissance is also called early modern period. There are 3 questions here. How did Rome come to its fall? I don't want to go into it. I will teach you when I teach you literature. Could you please give this PPT after class? How many times should I say this? Please pay attention. Please listen to the videos that I send. Please listen to what I'm saying. Every day after class, PPT I will give you. If you ask every 200 people ask me same question again and again, I will just fall dead. So please understand that I have already explained. Listen to this. Now, please post it in the group if possible. Will you please keep quiet? If you want something, I told you, tell in the group, not here. Okay? If you keep on chatting so much, you won't be able to pay attention. Other people also won't be able to pay attention. Just keep quiet. I told you, you should speak when I give you the break. If you go on chatting while I teach, at least a few seconds or 1 or 2 points, you will miss out. Do not chat. Okay, I already said post it in the group. That you can say in the group, not here. Okay, we have to have a discipline. Otherwise, don't say yes, ma'am, and all that for everything. I know it is yes. We have to have a discipline. Otherwise, it will waste everybody's time. Okay, that is why. Your time is important. More than anybody else's time, your time is important. That is why. Okay, right. Listen now. Now, the train of thought should not get cut. That is why. You just pay attention now. If you have doubt, you make note somewhere else and ask in the break. Now, moving on to medieval period. So, I'm only introducing, okay, tomorrow we are going to talk about this again. Now, medieval period means Middle Ages. At first, we had ancient period or classical period. Then we have medieval period. Then we have modern period. At the beginning of modern period, there is early modern period or Renaissance. Clear, everyone? Now, the second period, medieval period. I told you this is the time when Christianity was most dominant. Christian church is powerful. Christian church is collecting knowledge. In the monasteries, all knowledge is kept. That knowledge is not given to anybody. Christianity is oppressing, not all Christians, of course, the high clergy. They did a lot of wonderful things. But more and more corruption came. It began oppressing the low clergy and the ordinary people, which is why at the end of the Middle Ages, what came? Reformation came. At the end of the Middle Ages, Reformation came. So Christianity became very powerful, more and more powerful in the Middle Ages. Are you able to understand? Christianity had varying relation to classicism. Christianity had varying relation to classicism. Some of the Christians, monks and scholars, wanted classicism. They rewrote classicism. They preserved classicism. At the same time, there was also anti-pagan distrust. Classicism is pagan. It is not Christian. You can't trust classicism. That idea was also there in the medieval period. Did you understand? So Christianity had both affinity to classicism. Christianity embraced classicism. At the same time, it had distrust of classicism. Two important figures in medieval period in criticism, they are philosophers, as I told you, are Saint Augustine and Saint Thomas Aquinas. Wrong spelling. In M.A.R. Habib, there are big discussions on Saint Augustine and Saint Thomas Aquinas. I did not go into that. I don't want to teach you that in detail. Probably when I teach you medieval and Renaissance, I will teach you a little bit, but not too much detail. Okay, because I never saw any question anywhere about Saint Augustine or Saint Thomas Aquinas. But in a very advanced level, it is very important. Remember, in Wasteland, St. Thomas is important. In Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, St. Thomas Aquinas is important. So they are important in literature. But in our exams, whether it is KEA or HSST or HSA or NET or SET, I did not find any questions. But when I teach you day after tomorrow, I will teach you a little bit. All right. So important figures, Augustine and Saint Thomas Aquinas. At this time, Plotinus's Neoplatonism is revived. Macrobius, Boethius, remember? Plotinus's Neoplatonism is revived. And at this time, ancient universities came into being in Germany, Italy, France, England. Oxford and Cambridge came in the 13th century. These ancient universities began to organize learning. They began to organize education. They developed organized curriculum. 7 liberal arts. It was understood by the philosophers by this time that there are 7 liberal arts. Philosophers understood that there are 7 liberal arts. And these 7 liberal arts got divided into trivium and quadrivium. M.A.R. Habib has said that trivium means 3 roads. Quadrivium means 4 roads. Trivium is grammar, rhetoric, and logic. When I was a BA student, I studied Trivium Girl, GRL. Grammar, rhetoric, logic. But don't mistake it for geometry. It is not geometry. Grammar, girl. In feminism, GRRL, one group is there. In second wave feminism, GRRL, girls. Like that. Trivium is girls. Grammar, grammar, rhetoric, logic. Will you remember? Always make some funny code. Then you will easily remember. Quadrivium is, I don't remember what was my code. AGMA, arithmetic, geometry, music, astronomy. Arigmas. Arigmas. That itself you will forget. Quadrivium arigmas. Trivium girls. Girls you can remember. Grammar, rhetoric, logic. Quadrivium is arithmetic, geometry, music, astronomy. Like today, we study science stream, art stream, commerce stream, like that. These are streams of education. You should study in such a way that once you study, you revise, and for the rest of your life, you should remember. You can't study all these things again and again and again in your life. Now, medieval critical traditions. Till now, we gave a medieval introduction to medievalism. There was the grammatical tradition. What do you mean by that? Many people wrote grammars. What do you mean by grammars? Studying language. The structure of language became important. Why did people write grammars? Because studying grammar or the structure of language became important. So the grammatical tradition is there. The grammatical critical tradition. Writing grammar was itself a part of criticism. Then exegetic criticism or exegetic tradition. Exegesis means critical commentary on texts. Take a text and write the critical commentary of the text. That is called exegesis. Medieval critical traditions, grammatical tradition, exegetic tradition, then accessus. Accessus means introduction to authors. M.A.R. Habib has talked about it. Accessus tradition means introduction to authors. You have authors prescribed in trivium or quadrivium, and some critics will write introductions to those authors. They are called accessus. Clear? Then scholasticism. Scholasticism means focus on legal, logical, rationalistic issues. Scholasticism focus on legal issue, logical issue, rationalistic issue at the expense of genuine moral and ethical problems. They don't look at moral and ethical problems. Moral and ethical were Plato and Aristotle, remember. These people don't look at moral and ethical problems. Instead, they look at legal, logical, rationalistic issues. Humanism was against scholasticism. Our St. Thomas Aquinas was a scholastic. Humanism came replacing scholasticism. Scholasticism was rather rigid. Scholasticism was rather rigid. It was influenced by Islamic philosophers like Averroes and Avicenna. Averroes, another name is there for Averroes, Ibn Rushd. Ibn Rushd is Averroes. Avicenna, two famous Islamic philosophers. They were all influential on medieval tradition. Another tradition is allegorical critical tradition. Dante is important. Dante wrote Allegory, Divine Comedy. Dante wrote about critical issues also, especially in the essay, De Vulgari Eloquentia, means on eloquence in the vernacular. De Vulgari Eloquentia means on eloquence in the vernacular. Vernacular means spoken language. Listen, everybody. In those days, there were classical languages, Latin and Greek. Spoken languages, ordinary people's language. Literature was not written in spoken language. Literature was not written in vernacular language. It is in the late medieval period, as a part of Renaissance, that vernacular literature came into being. What is the vernacular language in England? English. In the medieval period, English people wrote in French and Latin. English was not considered a literary language. And all this I will again teach net people when I teach literature, okay? All this again I will teach. This is a free course. All that you are getting now is free. I mean, keep it. All this we will cover again in criticism and theory. So don't think this is the last time you're going to hear it. You will hear it so many times until you say, I know, please stop. Okay, right. So allegorical tradition of Dante, that was the beginning of humanistic traditions. Humanism started in the end of the medieval period, and humanism became the biggest force of Renaissance. Humanism became the biggest force or tradition of Renaissance. Humanistic currents started from Dante's De Vulgari Eloquentia, which supported, which advocated vernacular literature or literature in the spoken language. In England, English literature came into being because of this. Other writers of medieval humanistic tradition are Boccaccio, who wrote Decameron, Christine de Pizan. I never heard this name before. In M.A.R. Habib, Christine de Pizan is given as a very important woman theorist, a woman critic, and a proto-feminist. So I thought I will put her name here. Christine de Pizan. Christine of Pisa, I think that is the meaning. So that is a very important woman feminist critic of the medieval period. Okay, guys? Next is Renaissance. 2 minutes, unmuting you. Ask me your questions. Chat or type. Yes, Chaucer used vernacular because that is why he is the father of modern literature or modern poetry, because it was a Renaissance tradition to write in the vernacular. Anything you want me to explain?
Ma'am, good evening. You gave a reference of the Frogs play by Aristophanes. So can we consider it as a documented thing on criticism, the first thing in the history of criticism? If we talk about, okay. Because I read the play during MA and my professor taught me this, that this is the first document which is written. So you have to consider that tradition from that period. Since then, it has started. I mean,
it is considered part of criticism, and it has been discussed in detail in M.A.R. Habib.
Okay, all right. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Book of the City of Ladies. Grammatical criticism means writing grammars. Grammar, not like our grammar books. There was study of languages. You know, in those days, grammars means study of languages, a structure of languages. Like today, Roman Jakobson and Ferdinand de Saussure are people who wrote grammars or language books, but they are called critics, right? Like that. Okay, moving on. In the Renaissance period or early modern period, we have the very major movement of humanism. Humanism changed everything. Human being became important. In the medieval period, human being was considered sinner. Human being should be punished. Human being should not be celebrated in literary works, because human beings crucified Christ, human beings are sinners. The high clergy taught everybody to repent, not to enjoy life, to wallow in poverty so that you will go to heaven. All that changed with humanism. Human beings are considered great. Humanism began to celebrate human experience and human life. They began to read the classics, because after the fall of Constantinople in 1453, the classics became available in Europe. The classics, the manuscripts from Constantinople came to Europe. People began to read it. And then there were translations into vernacular languages also. Renaissance. Translators are interpreters. Translators became like critics. Translators will, not only just verbatim translate, they also interpret a text. So that became a part of criticism. The clergy and the scriptures, the clergy preserved the scriptures. The clergy translated the scriptures, interpreted the scriptures. Hermeneutics began. Hermeneutics is the tradition of reading based on the scriptures. Reformation came into being. Reformation of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church had become corrupt and the Protestant Church came into being. I'm not going into that story here because this is criticism class. The chief notions during the Renaissance are imitation. Imitation is good. Imitation of the classics is advocated. It is good. Literature should have a didactic function. Didactic means teaching, teaching or moralistic function, instruction. Literature should teach us. There are two accepted roles of literature or aims of literature. One is teaching, the other is delighting. Delight and instruction. These are the two accepted objectives of literature. So the didactic function became accepted in the Renaissance. In the Renaissance, classical unities were followed. People began talking about it. Verisimilitude or lifelikeness. Today, we call it realism. In those days, the word realism was not there. In Chaucer, there is verisimilitude. Verisimilitude means a text is lifelike. A text looks like life, realistic. And then writing in the vernacular became important. That is another notion of the Renaissance. They began talking about poetic genres, like Sidney did in Apology for Poetry. Sidney talked about 3 major kinds of poetry: religious poetry, philosophical poetry, and the imaginative or creative, true kind of poetry. What are the different kinds of the subgenres of these genres? What are the uses of these genres? All this began to be discussed in Renaissance. Listen, everybody, if anybody thinks I'm speaking so fast, so many things she said, I can't remember. Remember, this is only introduction. We will deal with all this in detail. Not only in criticism class, in net class also, if you are a net student. So don't worry. Now, poetic genres, Renaissance began to talk about. They began to talk about the use of rhyme. They began to talk about poetry in relation to philosophy and history. Sidney did that. Aristotle also did that. So Aristotle taught the Renaissance people to do all these things. All these are the major concerns of Renaissance. Ludovico Castelvetro, Torquato Tasso. Some of you may be hearing these names for the first time, but they are very important because Castelvetro inspired Sidney, Minturno, Castelvetro inspired Sidney. I will tell you tomorrow. And also Tasso inspired Fairy Queen. Tasso inspired Fairy Queen. So these are very important figures from Italy. Philip Sidney is a Renaissance critic. George Gascoigne, George Puttenham. So these authors I will talk about tomorrow. Like that, so many Renaissance critics emerged. Even Ben Jonson, I have not mentioned every one of them. Then came the neoclassical period. In the neoclassical period, first there were the French neoclassicists, Corneille and Boileau. Corneille was a playwright. He wrote Le Cid, L-E-C-I-D. Le Cid is a tragedy, but first it appeared as a tragicomedy. Corneille eventually became known as the father of French tragedy. Boileau was a writer who inspired many English writers. Boileau's Les Lutrines. Les Lutrines is the model for Rape of the Lock. Boileau wrote L'Art Poétique, which inspired Essay on Criticism, etc. So French neoclassicists are very important. Then in the neoclassical period, imitation and nature become very important. Imitation is important. Imitating the classical structures, classical styles, looking at classical styles and imitating it. Writing like the classical masters, following their genre, following their meter, writing their themes, down to the 19th century. Even Arnold said we should only follow ancient themes. We should write themes from the ancient masters. Don't use modern themes. So imitation or writing like the ancient masters is a very accepted neoclassical practice. Pope's imitations of Horace is a genre in itself. Horace is translated by Pope. Horace is translated by Pope, and the book is called Imitations of Horace. Today, imitation is a negative word. If you are writing, even if you are copy pasting, you won't call it imitation. Today, in the age of literacy, our value is authenticity, originality. Imitation is a negative thing. Now, in the neoclassical period, there was the influence of Newtonian physics. Newton talked about society in terms of nature. He understood society in terms of rules of physics, mathematics. Why? Because in those days, in religion, there was the principle of deism, D-E-I-S-M. Deism means believing that God is not here with us. You can know God only by applying reason. You have to think, analyze, experiment, interpret. Only then you can know God's creations. So for that, what happened? They started engaging in scientific experiments, understanding nature through science. Newtonian physics is a means of understanding nature. It is a means of understanding human life. It is a means of understanding God. All that is related to literature. So neoclassicism is influenced by Newtonian physics, a certain clarity in writing, a certain analytical precision in writing. Even when they write literature, even in Rape of the Lock, there is clarity, precision. These elements are borrowed from Newtonian physics because modern science came into being in the 18th century. There is at this time order in literature. Order is important. Clarity is important. Standardization is important. Individually, whatever you want, you can't write. Write in a standardized manner. If you're writing ode, then it should follow some standards. If you're writing sonnet, then it should follow some standards. Don't exercise your individuality and originality and write whatever you want. That is called standardization. Then regulation of the use of language and words. In the neoclassical period, language should be regulated because importance is order, clarity, standardization. Language began to be regulated. Follow some rules. Don't use whatever words you want. Follow poetic diction. Rules became very oppressive. Rules became very strict in the neoclassical period in order to maintain order, clarity, standardization. People did not exercise their originality. All this changed in Romanticism. In the period of Romanticism, originality and self-expression became important. In England, there were neoclassicists, Dryden, Pope, Addison, Aphra Behn, Samuel Johnson. So many important writers. Slowly, one by one, I will teach them. In criticism and theory course, I will teach them. In literature classes of NET, I will teach them. So don't worry, everything is getting covered. This is only an introduction. After or at the same time as neoclassicism, there was Enlightenment. It is a philosophical movement and the period is called Age of Reason. Remember, Matthew Arnold called it the Age of Reason. Enlightenment included very heterogeneous thinkers. Heterogeneous thinkers means very different kinds of thinkers. They are not the same kinds. Kant is there, Hegel is there, Voltaire, Diderot, Locke, Addison again, Burke, Wollstonecraft. I will explain a little bit. Immanuel Kant was a German philosopher who wrote Critique of Pure Reason, Critique of Practical Reason, Critique of Judgment. Immanuel Kant's philosophy is called Transcendental Idealism. And many German philosophers of the 18th century who came after Kant all learned from Kant. They were disciples of Kant, including Hegel. Kant and Hegel, I will tell you later. Voltaire is another French Enlightenment philosopher. Rousseau is also there, but Rousseau is more like romantic. He was a critic of Enlightenment. Diderot is a philosopher who made the encyclopedia. He made a huge, along with 100 other contributors, he made a huge encyclopedia, systematizing knowledge, presenting secular knowledge. Then there is Locke, John Locke, who developed a theory of language, a theory of the human mind in Essay Concerning Human Understanding. John Locke created, made a theory of wit and judgment. and he inspired Joseph Addison. Edmund Burke was a thinker and very important conservative philosopher. Edmund Burke is the author of Reflections on the Revolution in France, on the origin of our ideas of the sublime and the a philosophical inquiry into the origin of our ideas of the sublime and the beautiful. That is the title of another book where he talks about sublimity. A philosophical inquiry into the origin of our ideas of the sublime and the beautiful. Then there is Mary Wollstonecraft, who wrote Vindication of the Rights of Woman. She was also a thinker who applied the principles of reason, education, etc. The Enlightenment philosophers had some precursors. Precursors means from whom they got inspiration. Bacon, who was an empiricist. Descartes, who is a rationalist. Spinoza, who wrote Ethics. Bacon believed in experience. That is called empiricism. Experience is important. Tomorrow when I teach you Plato, Aristotle, I will explain. Bacon believed in experience as important. Descartes believed in reason as important. And Enlightenment was challenged by Rousseau, David Hume, Adorno and Horkheimer, who wrote Dialectic of Enlightenment, Marx and Engels, who questioned the tyranny of reason, Barthes, Roland Barthes, who questioned the very concept of order, etc. The Enlightenment criticism based on the principle of language. Language is very important. Language should lead us to understanding correct knowledge. They were against ignorance, superstition, incorrect understanding. Enlightenment philosophers focused on a philosophy of language. They believed in Lockean empiricism. Empiricism means experience is important. In Enlightenment period, experience becomes very important. That is why novel came into being, periodicals came into being, because people want to read and experience things. People started reading novels, periodicals, etc. because they wanted to experience things. Did you understand? So experience and empiricism led to sensory detail presented using the senses. They presented scientific descriptions, literal, denotative, clear language, no ambiguity, clear statements, that kind of language. They also emphasized taste and imagination. You can see the element of taste in Burke, Addison, etc. What is good taste? What do you mean by that? What is your understanding of good poetry? Do you have good taste? For example, I did a film appreciation course long ago in FTII, Pune, Film and Television Institute of India, Pune. And I had to fill up a form in order to get admission to the course. They asked me, name three films that you like and write a short appreciation of these films. That was one question I remember. Name 3 films that you have watched and liked and write a short appreciation of these films. Why are they asking that question? To check whether the participant has good taste. Good taste means what? Good taste means whether you know what is good writing, what is good literature, whether you know how to appreciate literature. Did you understand? So criticism focused on taste and imagination. And this imagination later developed in the Romantic period. This is why I said classes, even though Enlightenment is a neoclassical idea, neoclassical movement, I told you classicism and Romanticism are not watertight compartments. Classicism and Romanticism are not watertight compartments. In some of the ideas of classicism are there in Romanticism also. Imagination, for example. And the Enlightenment gave importance to education and progress. They believed that progress is necessary, education is necessary. Remember, Mary Wollstonecraft wrote about education. So that is Enlightenment. Next is Romanticism. I will unmute you for a minute. The number of participants in the Zoom session is steadily decreasing. I hope it is not because I'm boring you. Talk to me. Is there something you want to know that I should explain?
No,
You can
ma'am, no questions.
Okay. Anybody?
Good evening, ma'am.
Yes.
And once again, I want to ask something that it would be better if you just suggest something each and every day that what to read for today. Okay, ma'am. This
PPT.
is PPT, ma'am. That is different, ma'am. Means what to? Okay. What other things? As you're saying, suggesting that you can read more books. So some other things also as a homework. We are going through your video. That is fine. But what other things? Just a small homework.
I feel like already the writers which are there suggested, ma'am is side by side telling that you can research on those writers more. The one which
I'm not saying that. I can understand that what ma'am has suggested. That is quite good.
Let me explain. Let me explain. It depends on the individual, because some of you may not have some of these books. Some of you may not understand this book, but you would rather read another book. So in an advanced level of education, actually we just have to say these are all the books that are important, and then leave it to the student to find out what is best suitable. You can read M.A.R. Habib, you can read B. Prasad. It is very simple, but every single thing may not be there in B. Prasad. You can read M.S. Nagarajan, every single thing may not be there. Then you have the internet. Anything, anywhere in the internet, if you read, it is good in a way. Even Wikipedia is very carefully edited by people, and many mistakes are not there. So if I give you more work than this, already reading PPT is a big work.
Yeah.
People, even though when you tell me this, it looks like I will do. Idealistically, enthusiastically, it looks like I will read PPT again. I will watch your video again. It is not practically possible. So reading this PPT, looking up a little bit extra itself is a big work. Let us move on a few more days, and then you will understand. Okay. Still, if you want me to suggest something to read, I will do. But in the whole class, I don't want to do, because many people will get pressurized. I have a very democratic approach, a medium approach. And
no, ma'am. Actually, I think you have you're a so experienced teacher, and I don't think that you are going a little in. You know it better than I think every one of us. More
that
than
is true, actually. That is true, actually.
You know how to take care of the students, and according to the time and the level of the every student is different, and
Yes.
I feel feel that more.
I understood.
That I think how you are going, you know the best.
Let me speak. What I'm saying is, I will give you a list of the books that I have been using. I can post a link from Amazon or something. I can also show you the books that we have. If you don't have it, don't feel pressurized. It's okay. You can also read a little bit of about all these main titles, or whatever you feel like you can read extra. But remember, reading should be kept minimum, because otherwise you won't get time. You will find that, oh, I wasted every day, I didn't do much. When you read, just try to get 4 or 5 points, and then stop reading that topic, read something else. Like that you can do. Okay, I will do in the group. Okay, after the class today I have to teach till 11 o'clock. After that, in midnight I will do, and then tomorrow you can look at it. Okay.
Ma'am, I have a question. When we were discussing the new classicists, we all know that they follow some rules, the set rules, the classical rules. But you mentioned that they also said that we could follow Shakespeare or Elizabethan rules. So there come the breaking of some rules you were discussing about. If you could once again.
No, they are only suggesting new rules, not only breaking. They are saying there are other rules, not only these.
Okay, ma'am. Okay.
Shakespeare became like a rule. That is why Shakespeare got canonized at that time in the 18th century. 18th century is the time of Shakespeare cult, because he became a new rule. It is not like you can write whatever you want, but okay.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah. Muting you because I have to keep to time. People are asking me in chat box questions that I've already answered. Once again, I am telling you, this PPT will be given as PDF in your group. Don't ask me that again. Our books and everything that you need, I will tell you in the group. Don't ask me that. I will tell you. Things that I have already said, please don't ask me. I already said it. I will just be patient. We have only begun. You are going so fast. If you go so fast, you won't be reaching the end. Go slow, slowly. Give me time. I will post everything. Okay? Right. Come here to Romanticism now. Romanticism is heavily influenced by American and French revolutions that happened at that time. And it ended with the Napoleonic era. If you don't know that history, wait till Romanticism criticism class, or wait till literature class, or do your own reading. I'm not going into that now. In Europe, there were also revolutions of 1848. Many European countries underwent revolutions, like Greece, for example. There was the Industrial Revolution. And in Romanticism, practice and theory got intertwined. Many of the Romantics are not critics, they are poets. And Romanticism emerged first in Germany. Schiller, Schleiermacher, Schlegel, important figures. They inspired Coleridge, as you might know. France also had Romanticism eventually. First, France was completely neoclassical in the time of King Louis XIV. After that, Romanticism emerged in France. Rousseau is the only name that we know of very well. Chateaubriand, you might have heard, very important name. Sainte-Beuve, I keep saying, I don't know how it is pronounced. I forgot to look up. For years, I have forgotten to look up this name. He was a very major influence on Arnold, for example. So these figures, even though all of us may not know them very well, they are important. And in England, different varieties of Romanticism emerged. The early Romantics, or the transitional poets, had some critical approaches to life and writing. Thomas Gray, for example, In Progress of Poesy, he's talking about the development of poetry in that poem. So I'm just giving you a random example of critical perceptions in these early writers. Oliver Goldsmith, another early writer who showed romantic tendencies. Robert Burns, very much so. Sometimes they are not writing a critical work, but with their writing, they are starting a new tradition. Did you understand? They are starting a new tradition itself in criticism and literature. William Blake, very important figure. And then we have the most important critics, Wordsworth, Coleridge, Shelley. It would be a mistake if I don't mention Keats also. Let me mention Keats also, because with his negative capability, egotistical, sublime, etc., he went as far back as far ahead as, not back, as far ahead as T.S. Eliot. You know, some ideas of T.S. Eliot, like impersonality, are there in Keats in a small way. So these are very influential critics who laid the foundations of Romanticism. In America, we have Romantics. Many of them were critics. Emerson, Whitman, Thoreau, Margaret Fuller, Hawthorne, Nathaniel Hawthorne. They were people who wrote non-fiction and criticism, as well as they suggested new traditions and approaches through their writing. Goethe was German. Goethe was not a romantic. He was a classicist. He was not a romantic. He was against Romanticism. He established Weimar classicism. That is why I did not mention him here. It is a very big mistake if I mention Goethe as a romantic, because he was against Romanticism. Even though his later poetry influenced Romanticism, he was a classicist. He was engaged with Enlightenment and Weimar classicism. Then, inadvertently, Goethe's Sorrows of Young Werther inspired Sturm und Drang theory, or a Sturm und Drang movement. But that is not intentional. He did not start romanticism or anything. Then realism and naturalism came. This was a reaction to the rise of imperialism. Society and life changed completely because of these developments. Imperialism was at its peak. Industrial revolution accelerated. Industrial working class challenged the bourgeoisie. And at this time in France, there were painters, many painters. Realism emerged in painting. Romanticism was also there in painting. Gustave Courbet, Balzac, Flaubert, Stendhal, Maupassant, etc. are realists. They looked at character, people's lives, how people are motivated to act, what are the consequences of action. In England, there were different kinds of realism that flourished in the works of Dickens, Thackeray, George Eliot, Anthony Trollope, George Meredith, Thomas Hardy, etc. Realism looked at people's lives and society in a realistic manner, and it also gave way to naturalism. Naturalism is an offshoot of realism, which looks at how people are produced by their environment. People become products of their environment. People are becoming outcasts or prostitutes or criminals, etc., because of the environment. That is called naturalism. Okay, I will explain that later. In America also, there were so many realists: William Dean Howells, Mark Twain, Henry James, Émile Zola in France. Sorry, Émile Zola is French, French naturalists. Then Frank Norris, Theodore Dreiser, Stephen Crane, etc. This is why I don't want to send PowerPoint before the class, because I will be editing it inevitably in the class. Symbolism and aestheticism is there. Jean Mourier wrote a manifesto of symbolism. Arthur Symonds wrote the famous book Symbolist Manifesto, Symbolist Movement in Literature, which inspired British writers. Symbolism used symbols, and it is an offshoot of Romanticism. It is an avant-garde movement also. Avant-garde means experimental movements that came at the end of the 19th century. Avant-garde means experimental movements that rejected established ideas of form and meaning. Experimental movements that came at the end of the 19th century, rejecting traditional realism. Now, Baudelaire, Mallarmé, Verlaine, Valéry, these are important figures. L'art pour l'art is the aesthetic movement of Walter Pater and Oscar Wilde. Walter Pater and Oscar Wilde. Aesthetic movement means they gave importance to, aesthetic movement gave importance to art as separate from life. Art need not follow any rules. Art is complete in itself. Did you understand? Art is self-sufficient. That is the meaning of art for art's sake. And it is against art for life's sake. At this time, I will write that here. At this time, there were writers like Arnold and Ruskin. There were writers like Arnold and Ruskin who believed that art should exist for the sake of life. Art should teach life values. Art should reflect life. That idea is rejected by Walter Pater and Oscar Wilde in Art for Art's Sake movement. Did you understand? So symbolism and aestheticism are related. Symbolism is there in aestheticism also. Aesthetic movement also employed symbols. A related movement was pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood in England. So that is there. And then other 19th century thinkers. Some critics, some thinkers were critics of the bourgeoisie or the middle class, like Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer wrote The World as Will and Representation. Friedrich Nietzsche, who talked about the will to power and Superman. He said, God is dead. We will talk a little bit about them. Then Bergson, Andre Bergson, who inspired T.S. Eliot, Creative Evolution. That is the book by Andre Bergson. Then there are people who talked about economics in a liberal way. They talked about free market economics, laissez-faire economics. Economic liberalism is found in, sorry, I will write the full names in case some of you don't know. Adam Smith. Adam Smith is the father of economics. He was a member of Dr. Johnson's circle. He advocated laissez-faire economics or free market economics. Laissez-faire economics. Then there was David Ricardo. David Ricardo influenced our Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. So these people who talked about economics in a liberal manner were very, very important. Adam Smith, David Ricardo, Thomas Malthus. And then there were utilitarians. Utilitarianism is a movement of the 19th century which believed in the utility of things and also the greatest benefit of the greatest number of people. I will explain all that later. Jeremy Bentham, James Mill, J.S. Mill, very important figures. Then there were anarchists who were against the established society and established order, including William Godwin. William Godwin was the father-in-law of P.B. Shelley and Charles Baudelaire. They were anarchists. They were trying to bring about a new world order. And they did not succeed, but still, there were Victorians like Thomas Carlyle, John Ruskin, William Morris, and Matthew Arnold. They are other 19th century. It was a very heterogeneous period. So many different kinds of thinkers and writers existed at this time. And then in the early 20th century, we have the end of literary criticism in its traditional sense. Humanism ended. And partly they are humanists. The formalists are partly humanists, but not fully. There were two major groups, the Russian formalists and the new critics. The Russian formalists gave importance to literary language. They gave importance to defamiliarization of literary language. They believed that the form of literature should be very different from ordinary form, because then only literature will be able to carry meanings in a very structured manner. The Russian formalists include Viktor Shklovsky, Boris Eichenbaum, Roman Jakobson, Mikhail Bakhtin. Mikhail Bakhtin is not a proper Russian formalist, but Mikhail Bakhtin is also considered to have an affinity with Russian formalism. He is partly concerned with Russian formalism. Did you understand? New critics are there. The Cambridge practical critics. Who are the Cambridge practical critics? I will write their names. The Cambridge practical critics are I.A. Richards, F.R. Lewis, and William Empson. They are all people associated with Cambridge, and they all started the tradition of new criticism. New criticism came to be called new criticism later in America because of J.C. Ransom's book, The New Criticism. New critics in America are J.C. Ransom, Cleander Brooks, Alan Tate, Robert Penn Warren, etc. Wimsatt and Beardsley also. New critics are associated with Chicago School, but they are also different from Chicago School. Chicago School means Neo-Aristotelians. Chicago School are also a little bit similar to Aristotle. They are similar to new critics, but they are different also. Neo-Aristotelians like R.S. Crane, Elder Olson, Richard McKeown, Wayne C. Booth, etc. They are the important Neo-Aristotelians. They went back to the critical principles of Aristotle. Associated schools of formalism are modernism and myth criticism. So that brings us to the end of literary criticism. After this, there have emerged many critics, but they are not in any such school They are diverse critics. I will talk about them in 20th century criticism. Okay. Now, what are the different kinds of criticism? I will teach you for 5 or 10 more minutes. I hope you don't mind. Different kinds of criticism include biographical criticism, which analyzes a writer's biography to show the relationship between his life and works of literature. Biographical criticism emerged with Dr. Johnson. Dr. Johnson wrote Lives of the Poets. New critics disapproved of this approach and advocated biographical fallacy. Comparative criticism is there, which means comparison of texts and cultural practices in other locations. Comparing different texts from different locations. This is called comparative criticism, began with Dryden. It is against fixed ideas. It is against hegemony of certain kinds of literature. Then ethical criticism is there. Arul Murugan is asking me, what are the, I told you just now, who is the pioneer of new criticism? You can say J.C. Ransom. It depends on the options. You can also say I.R. Richards sometimes. Then ethical criticism is inclusion of the ethical component in interpretation. Ethics, you have to talk about. Started with Aristotle. Ethical criticism discusses autonomy versus morality. Literature is autonomous. Art is autonomous. It can do whatever it wants. That is one idea. That is against ethics. The other idea is this morality. That means literature should be moral. Literature should teach us values. So which of these is important? How do you justify it? Unlike ethical criticism, moral criticism only judges a work as good or bad. Moral criticism means, is the work good or bad? That is moral criticism. Ethical criticism means deeper understanding of the ethical concerns in literature. Expressive criticism is there. A literary work is seen as the expression or overflow of the author's vision, ideology, mental state, or social context. A literary work is seen as the expression of the author's vision. The author's vision should be expressed in expressive criticism. You understand a text as an expression of the author's views, ideology, mental state, etc. You can do expressive criticism of Sylvia Plath. You can do expressive criticism of anybody, in fact. What was the mental state of Shakespeare when writing Hamlet? What were the things that he was undergoing and why did he write like that, you know? Then feminist criticism means looking at how women have been marginalized in economic, political, social, psychological ways. Historical criticism means looking at the context of literary production, reception, looking at the history behind the text, the world behind the text. Mimetic criticism means the text is understood as an imitation of reality, understanding the text as an imitation of reality. Both literature as reflective of the world and literature as imitative. Literature as reflecting the world, literature as imitating the world. Both are there in mimetic criticism. What is pragmatic criticism? Understanding the social function of art. Art has a use, a social function in shaping the needs of the audience. Plato did pragmatic criticism. Charles Sanders Peirce, who was a contemporary of Saussure, did pragmatic criticism. Then psychological criticism, analyzing the psychology of the author or the reader or even the text, the unconscious element of the text. Social criticism means looking at society and how social issues are reflected in literature. Textual criticism focuses on textual variants. Different variations of the text will be there sometimes. In contemporary text, we don't do textual criticism. It is about ancient texts. Formalism, I already said. Theoretical criticism focuses on theoretical ideas. Mythological criticism studies the mythical patterns behind literary works. It need not be actual mythology, but underlying patterns of text can be studied in myth criticism or mythological criticism. They understand that there are universal patterns underlying literary works. So now I have come to the end of the presentation. I will send you the PPT. Tell me if there is any doubt or anything you want to ask me. Many of these things that you are already saying, I will do in the group, so don't worry.
I want to clear the doubt regarding, like, I want to understand the term imitation properly. I read it in the apology for poetry.
And
Imitation.
understand it tomorrow, because I'm going to teach you classical criticism tomorrow, as you know.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. No issue.
That's all.
Yes, ma'am. No questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. About the set of 44.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank
I
you,
have
ma'am.
made a video on the 44
Thank you,
books.
Ma'am,
Yes.
can I ask a question regarding the
Yes, yes.
chronology that you have done, ma'am?
Yes.
Where will I get the PDF of the same?
Somebody else, please answer.
Ma'am, we'll give you
It is
everything in the
available
group.
on.
Sorry, I don't know. Probably you are not present. I have told several times I will get this PDF. I will give this PDF. After class every day.
It's not
Okay.
yet available in Telegram, ma'am.
Pardon me?
Is it available in Telegram? That's what I wanted to know. I searched the group, but I didn't find.
After the class only, ma'am will send that.
I think she is asking about the chronology class.
Yeah, I'm asking about the
Last week.
chronology
Oh,
class.
chronological.
Yes.
Of course.
That's
10
in the
PM.
Telegram group.
Yes, yes, ma'am.
That is in Valence Test public group.
Yeah.
You mean general group, ma'am?
Valence Test public group is the name of the group.
Yes, is the general group.
I
Oh, I
thought you
need
were
to
asking about this PPT.
No, 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 no.
Okay.
So I need to
will-
join that group, ma'am.
Wait. I will explain. In all these groups, I will post everything. Don't worry. I will sit and post now. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
See you tomorrow. Another thing is about the schedule. Wait. Another thing is about 4 to 6 timing. I know many people have left, but still, I don't want to change it actually to 5 to 7, because like this 10-15 minutes I will take. But the problem is I have always everyday class at 7 p.m. So if I'm taking 15 minutes or half an hour extra, it won't be possible if it is 5 to 7. But
Okay, ma'am.
I can make it 4:30 to 6:30 if you want.
Yes, ma'am. That would be
Yes,
great.
ma'am.
Yeah.
30, ma'am.
All right, fixed 4:30 to 6:30.
Yeah.
It would be fine.
Thank you so much.